So, welcome everybody to another edition of the Embodied Dialogue podcast. My name is Seth Dellinger, and I'm very pleased today to be talking to Gregory Sadler. And Gregory is the co-founder of an educational consulting company called ReasonIO, which puts philosophy into practice. So, public speaking, he does philosophical consulting with different organizations, as well as individual counseling and coaching, tutorial services. And the way I found out about what he's doing is he has an extensive library of lectures and talks and discussions on philosophy on YouTube. We'll be sure to put a link to his channel under this video. And currently teaches, he's an adjunct professor in philosophy and humanities at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. So welcome.
Thanks.
So yeah,
thanks
here.
for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything else you'd just like to share about your basic, background?
Yeah, I will mention two other things. One is that I'm a team member of Modern Stoicism, which is it eventually became a not-for-profit company that puts on things like Stoicon and Stoic Week and all of that sort of stuff. And not everybody on the team is a Stoic. I identify as an eclectic, and there's quite a few that do that. But we all think Stoicism is quite important. And then I have a local radio show too that I co-host with a good friend and colleague of mine called Wisdom for Life. And it's sort of all over the map, but it's always something philosophy related that can be applied to ordinary people's lives. And it's a lot of fun being in radio. Everything has to be rather precise. You get exactly 58 minutes to get your thing across, and so you got to make sure that it's all compressed into that. But
Right,
it's a lot of fun. You can reach a wider audience that way.
right, right. Well, and as I told you before we officially started recording, I'm probably a good target audience for you. I'm definitely not a steeped in philosophy kind of person, but I find you very approachable. And when I was watching your videos, there's some complex topics, but I felt like you broke it down really well.
Yeah.
And you also do a lot of public speaking. I mean, so this has really been, I guess, I'm just imagining that you kind of sensed in your study of philosophy, hey, there's something really amazing here in this whole tradition that a lot of people just don't have access to. And it seems like you've made it a point to try to bridge that gap somewhat.
Yeah, I have a weird background. I don't come from an academic family,
Mhm.
and I'm sort of officially a first generation college student, although my dad did go to college and, got a law degree and all that, but he died when I was 11, so he wasn't around to give me any sort of guidance.
Mhm.
And, I came from a family essentially of tradespeople.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of emphasis on don't don't talk about stuff that people can't get, right?
Mhm.
And then in
Yeah.
my various teaching positions, it was kind of lucky for me in the long run that I didn't do the typical go to grad school, do some postdocs, make your way into a research institution. But instead, I was, my first main teaching gig was teaching in a maximum security prison for 6 years. And teaching humanities and philosophy and religious studies classes. And then, other places I taught, a struggling historically Black university, community colleges, some good 4-year liberal arts colleges, but I wasn't teaching philosophy classes like the upper level ones. I'm teaching intro and ethics and critical thinking and stuff like that. And so the net effect of that is that once you get over the fact that you're teaching people who come in the class and they're like, why the hell am I here? I have to take this
Right.
stupid class,
Right.
right?
Right.
Once you get over that initial thing and you're like, well, we can be ambassadors for our discipline, and a lot of the stuff that we're looking at, even if it's in thinkers that are, considered very abstract and difficult, like Aristotle or Immanuel Kant, or pick whoever else you want. If you can like figure out how to apply it to ordinary life and to the things that people are interested in, whether it's popular culture or what they're majoring in, um, there's a nice virtuous feedback loop that gets set up. The students are like, oh, this is this is good stuff. It's not the BS that I was expecting.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
And then, they have a positive attitude towards you, and you're like, oh, this is fun. This is engaging. I'm not like shaping minds and lives on a grand scale here, but I'm making some small contributions. And, from year to year to year, especially when you have students who come up to you later on and they're like, I'm out in the workforce now. I was just thinking the other day about this thing that you actually said in ethics class. And I'll be like, well, I didn't say it. Aristotle said it. I just brought it up.
Right,
And
right.
they'll be like, it was really useful for me. Right. When that happens, then it creates this nice trajectory where I think a lot of us need to know that what we're doing does something positive,
Mhm.
right? Otherwise we get burned out. We get kind of jaded with what we're doing.
Right.
And so my experience with philosophy, fortunately for me and hopefully for my students, has been seeing that it can be brought into the regular person's life and make some sort of difference.
Yeah,
And so, I provide resources for people to be able to do that. And there is an incredible hunger out there. Um, I think that, and I've talked about this in many other places, so I'll keep this kind of short. There's this great hunger that's always been there on the part of regular people for substantive engagement with ideas. They don't want to be
yeah,
talked down to or pandered to, right? They don't want the super glitzy 5 minute, now you know everything about Kant kind of stuff. What they want is somebody to take them seriously, but they also want the person to speak their language and
right.
to make it accessible for them and not to make them feel like dummies for not understanding everything. And that's where so many people in my profession just fail for
Mm.
one reason or another, right?
Right,
They're kind
right,
of, whether they realize it or not, they frame themselves as elitists bringing fire down from heaven to the rum dums doing regular work, and
right,
that doesn't come across very well, right?
right. Well, so I want to get into the specific topic that you've spent so much of your time, so much of your life really dedicated to. But it's what you said so far is already really interesting to me as we
Yeah.
get to it, because just our concepts of, like when we think of university and professor, we think, oh, smart people, and we think, like
Yeah.
you use the word elite already, and yet you were teaching in the jail. In my own background, I grew up pretty middle class or whatever, but I had a few experiences. Be longer story, but I ended up working in meat production for almost a
Okay.
decade. And all of a sudden, just everyone's way of being all around me was like, this isn't how my family acts. But
Yeah.
like, there was so much that I learned that, like, I discovered a lot about my ignorance when I went into the factories, like, so it was a really, um, anyway, I'll sort of put a peg in that. But what, let's just get into a little bit. You have covered many topics. I think I've even seen videos on your YouTube of like about heavy metal music, and like you like
Yep.
to just read fiction that you enjoy and share. But the question of anger has been
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
huge topic for you, and I know a little from taking in your content that this goes all the way back to childhood. But maybe you could just say, like, what's going on with that, and you've really dug deep, because different philosophers have written about anger, but I often hear you talk about them, and they're like, oh, they wrote a little here and a little there, but you're the guy who's sort of like scoured all those pieces and brought them together, it seems like. So anyway, give us a little background.
Yeah. I was laughing when you were originally bringing it up, in part because in my professional career, I have had this as like a focus, you could say, right? So
Yeah,
there's like an
yeah,
agency on my part, but it does come from having been a very um, anger prone person from childhood onward. I think that temperamentally, some people are more inclined to anger than others, and so it can be more of a challenge for some people. And then, I mentioned that my dad had died when I was 11. In the time that I grew up, there was this big emphasis on toughness. And I mean, I was talking with a friend of mine whose mother died recently, and I was mentioning that I didn't cry for years because at the funeral, I had all these guys coming up to me and saying, "You're the man of the house now. You know, you need to be tough and take care of your mom and sister." And I was 11 years old, now
Yeah,
close to
that's
my 12th birthday, but
heavy duty.
yeah. And so, I grew up in this environment where toughness was really valued, and anger is one of the few emotions that was considered okay to feel, although it could get you in a lot of trouble. And I did get in a lot of trouble. By the time that I was a teenager, I was involved in a criminal organization called Midnight Sales and Services, and like doing security for them when they go and fence goods, and getting in fights and stuff like that. And I wound up getting in so much trouble that my mom actually, when I was in a juvenile detention facility, filed an uncontrollability petition, which made me a ward of the court, and then they sent me to treatment, and that was very eye-opening because I saw other people's lives who sucked way, way more than mine and put things in perspective. And it was there was a lot of that going on, right? And one of the things that I noticed before I even got into philosophy was you don't really get any education or even training about how to handle anger unless you get yourself in trouble. And then it's like you got to go to anger management. We're going to give you a workbook, but it's usually just kind of ad hoc stuff that they just throw at you, and they're like, "Try this out."
Mhm.
And a lot of it wasn't helpful for me at the time. And so I'm carrying this with me, and I'm an angry guy. I go in the army, I get out, I go to college, I go to graduate school. And it was in graduate school that I started looking into philosophical theories about anger. And it happened in a couple ways. One was I saw my own professors getting into like shouting matches with each other in the classrooms or in the hallways or department meetings where they're like spitting on each other. And I was like, man, I know I'm screwed up, right? I'm just some kid, who, how did he end up in grad school? Who the hell knows? But these people are supposed to be rational. they're,
Right,
they're our
right.
models and exemplars. What the
Yeah.
hell's wrong with them, right? So there's that impulse. And then I was doing a lot of reading in original languages, like in Aristotle, in the Greek. And I noticed, like you mentioned, there's no like one single place where Aristotle talks about anger. There's a lot in the rhetoric and the Nicomachean ethics and the politics and other places, and you kind of have to bring it all together. And when you can actually read the texts in Greek, the differences that translators have made in how they render certain terms, you lose that. So you start seeing, oh, he's talking about exactly the same thing over here that he is over here, and I didn't get it in English because they're using different words for this.
Uh-huh.
So that was kind of a revelation. So I started, doing a lot of work on Aristotle and anger. And then I started, looking at Plato, because he very famously has this middle part that is he calls thumos, that we can translate as anger or the spirited element, and it plays an important role. And I started taking the Stoics more seriously, and reading them and seeing what they had to say. So by the time I came out of grad school, and I didn't write my dissertation on that, it would have been kind of nice if I had. I wrote it on other stuff instead. I had like this side project of
Mhm.
figuring out what different people had to say on anger. And it was kind of cool because the more I looked into it, instead of it being like I zero in and I get to the bottom of this, it was like, oh, there's this text and this text and this thinker and this thinker.
Yeah.
And I kept on finding more and more people in ancient and also in medieval philosophy and even early modern philosophy who were really interested in how anger works and whether it's good or bad and what we can do with it and how we can, you know, make it more rational, or how we can get rid of it altogether. So it became kind of a sideline. And what I really ought to do is like write some books about it or something.
Yeah.
But instead
Yeah.
I did like talks about it.
Yeah.
And and I worked with a lot of clients on anger management, because like I said, even today, there's you can get some education on it, a little bit more than back when we were kids,
Mhm.
but it's still pretty piecemeal. Most people don't get any information in any systematic way about anger unless they really, really screw up, and then they get sent for psychological counseling, right?
Right, and it would seem like, um, if you're sent into a program, I mean, you're already not there because you wanna learn and you
You're
wanna,
usually
you know.
pissed off about being in the program.
Right, that's what I would assume. It's funny, like, one of the impressions I had of you, because the first I told you the first time I saw you online, you were
Yeah.
at the Kingston Public Library, and you were doing a series of talks on anger, and one of the things I noticed is people kept interrupting you, and you were, like, totally cool, and you kept saying, "I have a real anger problem," but I was like, "He's so patient. This is
Oh,
awesome."
I mean, that was happening. So that was 2004, no, 2015 it was.
Uh-huh,
Because that's the year that we moved back here to Milwaukee from Kingston, New York. So, I'd had like a good 10, 15 years of researching the stuff and
mhm,
trying to apply it, and having screwed up plenty, like I actually like blew up at guys in a maximum security prison in my class, which is really stupid to do, right? To the point where like some of them were afterwards coming up to me and they're like, "Hey, I didn't mean to offend you, man." And these are like hardened, killers and
right,
kidnappers and rapists and stuff, and they were concerned about my anger, you
mhm.
know. So there was plenty of development by the time that I got to
Well,
that.
I'm curious, what was that like for you? Like, in the moment that one of those people came up and gave you that reflection,
It
did
was
that
very humbling.
yeah.
Because I'll actually say this too, and this isn't directly connected to anger itself. It was a really great job, even though it paid poorly and the conditions were bad, teaching at Indiana State Prison. It was a 4-year degree program through Ball State University.
Mhm,
And at that time, I think Ball State University probably had the most professors, certainly in Indiana and perhaps in the nation, in prison. There were over 100 of us who taught full time in the prisons. And it was really great for the guys who were involved. You could see, growth taking place, and that appreciating what you brought to the table, and working it into their own rehabilitation and sort of moral reconstruction. And it afforded me the possibility to teach a wide range of classes. But I went in as a guy who really did have, I was like fresh out of grad school. I taught a few classes on my own, and I would say I had quite a few chips on my shoulder. So for them to be saying, "Oh man, you don't have to take this so hard," um,
mhm,
it was a real sign for me that I was messed up and needed to get
mhm.
my you know whatever it is rearranged. And I'll mention one other kind of funny thing. So my ears would turn red when I would get angry. And back then I actually had my head shaved. So it was much more prominent. And a few of the guys would kind of like watch out for that because they thought it was funny. And yeah, it became kind of a running joke. And that was another sign that I needed to get it under control.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
So
wow. Well,
yeah.
so it seems like the big question about anger, which is way too simple a question, is like, is it good or is it bad? And of
Yeah,
course,
exactly.
but it really does seem to be like, and you also mentioned before Plato, and he had this concept around, which it's interesting to me because I think that it's not so far off of some of how we think about it today. But he gave a special attention to the head and
Mhm.
to the chest and to the belly,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
thumos, the anger is sort of in the middle. And you described it in one of your talks as being sort of um, like the thing that mediates between our thinking and our more sort of like supposedly base desires or impulses or whatnot.
Yeah.
But another thing that you mentioned in the same video is that this area of the body where he located anger is also where we might find courage, or the lack of courage, we might find cowardice.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, it's obviously not a yes no question. Um, but just as a way of beginning to get into more of the sort of different nuances of the experience. Um,
I mean, it is a yes no question for certain perspectives. So I mean, there are a few um, approaches that say that anger is always bad. And so the Stoics, for example, there's zero tolerance when it comes to anger. Um, some Christian writers, some Buddhist writers would say that anger is always a bad thing. And there are some who will make concessions, like John Cassian, a great monastic Christian writer, who's about as zero tolerance as you can get in his discussion of anger as one of the 8 principal vices, which will later become the 7 deadly sins. He says, there is one case when anger can actually be okay, and that's when you are getting angry at your own vices, including the vice of anger. So if you can get angry at your own anger, that can be helpful. And he doesn't say like, well, you should cultivate that or anything like that. It's just
right,
more like, well, if you're going to get angry, then at least make it helpful, right?
right,
So there are some who do say it's completely bad. And I do think there are some people, none of them are philosophers, but there are some people who seem to think that anger is generally good, at least for certain people. Like it does, you brought up courage, right? There
yeah,
is a great danger of getting angry and being aggressive, being identified with courage or with manliness. And so you get these tough guys who are actually, quite frankly, cream puffs. They're hard outside, soft inside. They're actually very afraid of looking, like they're afraid, or looking like they're not tough. So they're still driven by fear, even though they pretend like they're not at all. But they'll say stuff like, "Yeah, man, you should get angry all the time. Don't put up with that crap from that person," and they like egg each other on, you know.
right,
And it's a worse problem now, I think, that we have the internet, because young people, mostly young men, but even some young, women and whoever else fall into this as well. They all, they watch these different tough guys on shows, and I need to be like this person, you
right,
need to be like that person. So there is an extreme where people are saying anger is good, and then the more rational approaches are kind of in the middle. And
right,
then the question is, well, what makes it good or bad, right? And
right,
so we could look at, like, is it screwing your life up, or is it serving some legitimate purpose?
right.
There's a great danger of anger seducing us into thinking that it's good when it's actually not.
Mm-hmm.
As Aristotle says, anger syllogizes. It carries out reasoning processes. You know, so anger has a tendency to tell us that, yeah, it's okay for me to be angry in this situation, right? And that's where we
Yeah,
get.
when you say that, I think I've had the experience many of times when I'm angry, thinking I am definitely right, definitely right about this.
And the response that I'm doing, this is proportionate, right?
Yeah,
This isn't
yeah,
going over the
yeah,
limit or
yeah,
anything. And then
yeah.
somebody comes along and they're like, "Oh man, you really need to dial it back." And you're like, "Who the hell are you to tell me to dial it back?" Right?
Right.
So
Well, but this does seem to be that nuance or middle ground, is like where
yeah,
it's like proportion or dialing it back. Or like you said before, there's that attitude of don't put up with that crap. But of course, there are many people, and I would count myself in a lot of my life as, wow, I don't think I needed to put up with that crap, but I
yeah,
did. Why did I
yeah,
allow all of these things to happen? And something that really struck me recently, actually, it was a Buddhist teacher who was talking about anger. And, you're doing
yeah.
sitting meditation. And one of the things, of course, that you think about in meditation is just posture, right? Can I sit
Mhm.
upright, be comfortable? But he was talking about anger and noticing the uprightness in the spine that could come with it. But then if I'm really furious and like I can sort of shrink and like compress like this,
Yeah, yeah,
but the point was, okay, well, there's two things here. Can I differentiate that thing that makes me feel tall and dignified and like standing up for myself versus that just furious, almost impotent feeling that
yeah,
makes me, but they are kind of maybe in the moment where, let's just say someone insults me or does something, they're kind of in that moment, they're fused together.
yeah,
It seems that the skill is to like somehow try to separate them out.
Differentiate them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
differentiate.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that is kind of a deficit in ancient philosophy is they tended to be fairly dismissive of the body.
Mhm.
And so um they don't do things like that, like thinking about, I mean, they have some things that are bodily based, like thinking about what you look like when you're angry. And so trying to bring it before your eyes, how you're
Yeah, yeah.
snarling and that sort of thing. But they don't teach body work practices for the most part that would be helpful with that. Whereas, more modern philosophical stuff that incorporates insights coming from all over the place might. So that's actually a good place where maybe an approach that's based in ancient philosophy could benefit by drawing on um, other traditions,
Mhm.
right?
Well, at the same time, though, I noticed in one of the talks you sort of said we are totally screwed up in our culture about anger, and
Yeah, well, that's true.
right, and you well, and I mean, you can explain. I had thoughts in my head of like why I basically agree with that. One of which is this sense of like I think there, at least in a lot of people's experience, there really is a leaning towards all anger is bad to the point
Yeah,
where I just have to, whatever phrase you want, grin and bear it, or even you know, beautiful ideas like Martin Luther King turn the other cheek that can be distorted
yeah,
into like, maybe putting up with something. But you've also mentioned these anger management courses, which I mean, let's say I went to one of these courses not because I was told I had to, but I just thought, hey, this is a good thing. But I
yeah.
kind of got the sense that, and I don't have the direct experience, but I think I heard you say that a lot of these courses are also kind of insufficient. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean they're insufficient, and same thing with workbooks. You see a lot of anger management workbooks that you can buy at popular bookstores. Um, they're insufficient because it takes more than just a cognitive approach, learning what anger is. That's all helpful, and then doing a few practices and stuff like that. It has to become something that you decide to incorporate into your life. So you could take a decent anger management workbook, not even going to a course, and if you like really take it to heart and you're like, this is valuable for me, and you make it part of your daily practice, it'll probably help you out, right? But just getting the certificate from the class,
sure.
that's probably not going to do it any more than like other, there's other forms of personal development that, you know, I mean, it could be anxiety, it could be like getting over asking clients for money or something like that. You have to make it part of who you are. So yeah, there's that aspect. There was something else that you said that had jogged something in my head, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Um, Maybe it'll come back to me a little bit later.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, there's so many reasons why we get angry.
yeah.
And I think we've
Oh,
already sort of touched
the
on like,
the broader culture, right? I
yeah, oh
mean,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
in our narratives, we rarely see fictional characters who use anger in productive ways.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
A lot of times it's a substitute for something. My wife and we've recently been watching our way through Star Trek: The Next Generation, which she's a huge fan of, and I'm kind of a fan of. And it's interesting because the characters will yell at each other in angry ways, right? And you're like, why are they yelling at each other right now? Well, it's to show that they're taking something seriously, or that they are being commanding. And so going back to like people who don't get to feel anger, a lot of times it has to do with a power differential.
Yeah.
So you don't get to be angry because you're in an abusive household, and it's the parent who gets to be angry, and you kids better shut up and do what they say. Don't get angry, because then they'll smack you or punish you or something like that. Or you're in I don't know, some other hierarchical organization, and the boss gets to blow up all the time, but you don't get to say crap, and if you do, then you're going to get fired, or disciplined or something like that. So there's a lot of people who have to swallow their anger, and that's not helpful. I'm not saying that we should always just like go into a rage room and smash things or something, but that probably is better than just bottling it up. The best thing is to like work it through and figure out what am I angry about? Is it reasonable? How could I productively respond, to these sort of situations? And there's so many people who, day after day, they have any sort of outlet for their anger taken away or prohibited,
Yeah.
that it leads to all sorts of other problems.
Right. Well, I mean, I mentioned before this experience I had through meditation, and it was interesting. I kind of reflected, and I'm like, yeah, I get angry all the time, but typically when I get angry, I immediately hear a voice saying, you know, now you're acting in a way you shouldn't act, or
Yeah.
you should be more even keel. Even if I think the anger is justified, partially because of what I do, um, which is, broadly speaking, what people put in the realm of mindfulness. It's like, well,
Mhm.
you should just be Zen. But what I
That's
discovered,
the end state, right? I mean,
right, right, right,
and we can say this with like all sorts of things. There's
yeah,
people who are like, yeah, man, you need to jump from 0 to 100. That's
yeah,
not particularly helpful for those of us who are stuck at 5.
yeah. Well, so the way I think about it, what happened with me. So one of my key sort of central pillars of what I do comes from my training in the Feldenkrais method. And I don't know if you're familiar with Moshe
Mhm.
Feldenkrais. He's you know, uh, took a somatic approach, and I like to say that what he does is wisdom practice disguised as a movement practice, because he can help
Yeah.
people with back pain. But he really considered all these questions, and he talked about sexuality and the individual in society, and
Yeah.
the experience you talked about of a kid growing up, and I don't get to be mad in his household. Um, but one of the more general things he just talked about, from every angle you can imagine, is habits. And so if we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
a habit of I don't express anger, let's say I go express anger one time, if we just leave it like really vague like that, we could just say that I actually did something that expanded my vocabulary a little.
Right.
And so I had this one experience where I had just been thinking about this issue. And then I was working with someone, sort of a team that is in different places, so we had a Zoom meeting or something. And I got off the Zoom meeting and I realized I was kind of irritated and mad at this person. And it wasn't really a big deal, but I was like, I actually am mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, sitting here and pretending I'm not. And so I was going to do a meditation, and I realized the first idea I had was like, well, I should do a meditation so I could calm myself down.
Okay.
But instead, what I kind of caught myself, and I said, I'm going to do a meditation, and I'm just going to smolder. Like, I kind of imagined like smoke, like, but I just like, because all I'm doing is closing my eyes and breathing, and the person I'm
Yeah.
mad
Yeah.
at is across the world. So there's no harm done. But I just decided to really like embody this anger and just, and I felt so much better at the end. And I actually felt stronger. Like, and I think I did actually feel a little more zen even at the end.
Yeah.
But it was like, rather than, putting a label on this emotion and just pushing it away, I'm going to actually investigate it. And that was a big
Well,
revelation
that's
for
what I
me.
was going to ask you. Did any insights come out of that? I mean, even like specific ones, like, well, the reason this guy pissed me off is because he said this thing, and that's like this thing over here. I
Right.
mean, I think that can be incredibly helpful,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I don't remember the details, but one of the things I remember is there was just nuance to it. On one
Okay.
level, it was like, yeah, he said that, and that made me feel like he was kind of, belittling me.
Hmm.
And then there was another part where it was kind of like, oh, and I have this other thing that always comes up, and I'm like, oh, so maybe that wasn't him at all, but he sure did remind me of this thing that comes up in my life a bunch.
Yeah, yeah,
And then, then there was just, like I said, the sort of inner critic who says, don't be angry. And then, so
yeah.
there was actually all kinds of layers to it. But the thing about anger is it usually unfolds like that. It's
Yeah.
like time speeds up. So,
That's part of the problem with it. Seneca points this out, that anger doesn't want to delay. Actually, Aristotle does too. He says anger is like a hasty servant. It listens to half of what's said and then rushes off to go do its thing.
yeah.
And it's interesting because there's a similar dynamic in Stoicism, and I think similar misunderstandings. A lot of people are like, well, I'm going to be a good Stoic, so that means I shouldn't feel this stuff that I'm feeling. And it could be, anger, it could be anxiety, it could be whatever negative emotion you want. And so they're like, well, I'm going to turn it off. Well, that's totally ineffective. That's like totally setting yourself up for failure. And in the case of anger, sooner or later blowing up at somebody else. And Stoicism does, in fact, have its own equivalent of mindfulness. And there's a lot of debate about whether we can translate this as mindfulness. It's prosoche, attention. You should
Mm,
be paying attention to yourself all the time and what you're thinking and feeling. And so, some Stoics do meditate in the same sort of way, like regular time or regular place or bodily postures or stuff like that. But when you feel an emotion, you if you're a good Stoic, you're not just tamping it down and saying, I'm not going to feel this is no good. You're actually like looking at it and saying, what the hell's going on here? Why am I being affected this way? What caused this? Or
mm,
and a lot of it is thinking about, what am I bringing to it?
mhm,
What assumptions, or in Greek, dogmata, or hupolepsis, what am I bringing to the table that is resulting in this feeling and this desire to hurt somebody else. And if you do that, that becomes habitual, right? You start to see these larger patterns, and then you can start undoing them, seeing them as not necessary anymore, or not as useful as you thought they were, that you can have alternatives to them. You don't have to get angry, for example, like Seneca. Actually, and on anger, he likes to do this thing where he has a imaginary opponent say something. So this imaginary opponent at one point says to him, you're not going to get angry if you see your mom being raped or your dad being murdered. And Seneca's like, well, that's not going to help anything. And if I see my family member being attacked in such a brutal way, I can motivate myself by realizing that the right thing to do is to resist that. I don't have to get angry in order to do that. If I have to get angry, then that's a real problem, because what, I wouldn't protect them if I don't feel angry? No, protecting them is the right thing to do. Just go
huh.
do it.
That's funny because what I, when you'd say that, I think, well, he would get angry. but
Oh,
but
probably. Yeah. I mean,
but the other thing is like, y- you know what we were talking about before in terms of, I forget the phrase you used, but there's a thing like, anger can be a motivator, or like,
yeah.
like a sports coach might, like, before the game get the team angry at the opponents, and like they're
Yeah.
riled up, and then they go. But it seems like another thing to differentiate here is like, and I heard you talk about, I'll see if I can look at my notes real quick to see, but you mentioned, I don't know if this was John Cassian or Thomas Aquinas. Oh yeah, Thomas Aquinas,
Oh, the
that
difficult good.
said attaining the difficult good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you could say something about that, but just to finish my own thought, it was like, there's something when we encounter what feels like injustice that just puts us into action. And so maybe Seneca, I imagine, is saying something like, I don't have to have my ears turn red, but I
Right.
need to
Right.
do something about this right now. And that, I think, often it's anger that gets us to act, when before we're like kind of not angry enough to act, maybe, or
Yeah, I think that Seneca thinks, and I think that even people like Thomas Aquinas or Aristotle, who are more receptive to anger's proper use, or Plato for that matter, that it's always dangerous to rely on anger as the main engine motivating us. in part because it comes with so many other problems. It tends to distort our perception of what's going on and make us make connections to other stuff. We're like, well, that son of a bitch, he's not just doing this thing. I remember when he did this thing and this thing, and then we get
Yeah.
out of control, right?
Yeah.
Or it spills over onto the wrong people. So I mean, Seneca's point is that with right reason and virtue, like the virtue of courage, we can do what we need to do. Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and I do think Thomas Aquinas's insight about this difficult good idea is really a great insight. We need something that's like anger in order to make things happen when we're faced with difficulty or resistance or stuff like that. But it might be that what we need there is to develop the virtue or disposition that we call courage,
Mm,
you know,
right.
rather than just getting angry and then, I'm going to punch this problem in the nose.
Right.
So yeah, I'm receptive to the idea that some anger could be helpful. So I'm more Aristotelian than Stoic in that respect.
Mhm.
And it's interesting too, because if you think about, um, Stoicism in psychotherapy leads first to rational emotive behavior therapy. REBT actually does have a discussion of, like, they don't call it virtuous anger, but productive anger, right?
What
The
was the acronym used?
rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, which then leads to the other cognitive approaches like cognitive behavior therapy and then dialectical behavior therapy. But REBT, which is Alfred Ellis, um, he said, you can get angry and it can motivate you the right way when you are fighting injustice, right? But you can't successfully fight injustice by turning into the Hulk, because you're losing any sort of rationality in that, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, that's I think that's one of our big archetypes these days is the Hulk.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I mean, it just seems to me that like it's just exaggerated, right? It's not as if because we also get angry all the time and we keep a poker face. But that
Well, some people do. Some people
yeah,
blow up
yeah,
after
well,
the
yeah, I should speak a little more specifically, but I so it doesn't always just flare up. But I mean, I guess what I keep coming back to, and I'm curious to hear you say more because you mentioned it. You said that a lot of the classical philosophers didn't really incorporate the body, but it does seem that this is a question. On the one hand, we could have a sort of a discussion about ethics, but I feel like on
Yeah.
the other end, it's just a question of self-regulation. And then there's this moment where it's like, is this the moment to really draw on this power, or is this the moment to,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
to and so there's a discernment, there's almost like a mental aspect of
Yeah.
sizing things up. But then there's also like I might size things up really well, but then just find out that like I got so angry I still did something that later I think that was really stupid.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to go wrong, right? So it's not like getting one thing right automatically assures that you get things right across the board. And I think that's one of the problems that people fall into. For example, they think, well, my anger is reasonable, or as Martha Nussbaum in her recent book on anger is going to call it, well-founded in this situation. So therefore, me going and punching this guy out, or you look at what happens today, shooting somebody, it's because we have
Yeah.
so many people who are obsessed with guns and want to take them everywhere. That's the erroneous part of it. You can start. You could be perfectly legitimate in being angry about an insult to you, and then wrong in what you do next. You know, and I,
Mhm.
and I think there's too many people, not just with anger, but with other things, where they think, well, I've checked off this and checked off this, therefore I get to do whatever the hell I want, and that's just not good. And you mentioned ethics. Part of what ethics, when it's actually working well, does isn't just giving us rules, it's telling us, okay, you screwed up, now how do you unscrew this up and do the minimal amount of damage or further disruption to your relationships or your workplace or something like that. Um, so, and being able to figure out what your response ought to be, that is a matter of ethics, I think. But ethics in a broader sense than just, rules for right and wrong or
Yeah,
something like that. It's more like,
yeah,
what ethics used to be back
yeah,
in virtue ethics.
yeah. Well, if we could go back to some of your own experience, I mean, I guess that one of the things that happened as I watched some of these videos, because you would describe, how you'd had these experiences with getting really angry, and then you'd be talking about Plato
Yeah.
or Epictetus or something, and you'd say, well, they explain, this thing, but what I was saying a minute ago, I was like, but that really rational explanation in the moment I'm angry, how does that work? And so, but what I
Oh,
imagine is that philosophy can be, I mean, even if you just sort of say, I'm taking a philosophy class, if
yeah.
you get drawn in, I imagine it becomes a sort of just a process of self inquiry. So I'm just wondering, like,
Well,
for you working through and like maybe it looks like you've spoken about in recent videos. You said you're still working on this, but I imagine
yeah.
you've come a long way. And so I'm just wondering, what were some of your personal that even in the moment would change your behavior based on, oh, 5 years ago in this situation I would have done something differently. Like, what were some of the steps along the way that really were effective for you of
Yeah,
like
so I mean,
implementing them?
developing habits is important with that. And some of those habits are like you'll see Epictetus say, have ready at hand, right?
Mm,
Um, and what he means there is have this idea or passage or whatever, um, you know, make it a daily practice to think this to yourself. And then when you get into a situation, you're not like, oh, where the hell was that thing that I
right.
wanted to say to myself? You're like, it's right here.
Yeah.
And so there's a number of like lines of reasoning or evaluation that are provided in these different works on anger, or which we can derive. Like Aristotle doesn't provide us with any of that stuff. He just gives us like how anger works and a little bit about, the virtues and vices concerned with it. But we can take that and transform that into stuff that we can make part of our life. And,
So did
so
you develop practices along those lines, like even repeating
yeah,
certain phrases that you've read or anything like
yeah,
that?
and then you'd be in a situation and you're like, you're still angry, right? You're still
Right,
feeling it,
right.
and that jerk who pissed you off is still sitting across from you, but you've got like this thing, and it's saying, hey, think about this. And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, you
Sure.
gotta, there's no like one single approach or passage that cuts it off all the time. So you need a whole toolbox. And it doesn't just have to be a Stoic toolbox. It could be, Stoic elements and Aristotle and Plato and Plutarch and Cicero and all these other people, um, put in, depending on who you want to have as your interlocutors. But there's a feedback loop with it. So you do it, and like the first couple times, you're like, well, this is bullshit. This isn't going to work at all,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah.
And you don't keep yourself from getting angry at all, but maybe you don't say that cutting thing that would have felt good to say, but was going to really wound somebody. And then the next time it's a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And Epictetus says it's like that. If you manage to go a day without anger, just like, oh, that's great, right? And then if you can go 30 days, now go and make a sacrifice to the gods.
Mm.
And how hard, how much do you have to work before you go 30 days? I've never done it. Just like when you're think about, I used to try to do sitting meditation, and one of the first things when I was learning about Zen was, well, here's the first thing: just empty your mind, just follow your breath and count, right?
Right.
And the highest I ever got was 4, because you know what it's like. You start thinking, you take a breath and you're like, oh, I'm doing good. Up, start again, right? Now you take a breath, you get 1, you get 2, and you're like, oh, see, this isn't so hard. Well, start again, right?
Hmm.
And so a lot of this is not like perfection,
Hmm.
always having the right response. It's sort of like, it's like it's bodybuilding. You you're not going to go in and start doing all the heavy weights at the greatest levels right away, and maybe you never will.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that you're not, helping yourself. Even if you're not actually increasing weights for months or for years, you're still conditioning your body in the right ways that are going to be helpful for you. And we can say that about anger, we can say that about being loving to people,
Right.
realizing what different people need at different times, so we're not such selfish, you know, getting things wrong,
Right. Right.
hurting them, making them angry kind of people. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, it sounds like what you're describing is having a clear intention of a way of being that I'm moving towards.
Yeah, or at least doing damage control when things are getting off kilter and being able to say, I'm not completely in the right. I'm screwed up. I need this
Right.
remedy here. And I guess it's helpful too to have other people who you can look at and say, well, I'm screwed up, but they're screwed up too. So, it's not so bad that I've lost my temper one more time. I don't know. It is bad in the sense that I don't want to do bad stuff, but it doesn't make me a horrible person that I've lost my
Right.
temper,
Right. So there's sort of exempting ourselves from a just completely self-destructive kind of perfectionism
Yeah, yeah.
about how we're
Or
supposed to be.
or which could turn into depression, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes depression is anger turned inward on the self. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Is there anything in, all the works that you've studied on inward turned anger? Is that something that was
Yeah, there's
found?
bits and pieces here and
Uh-huh.
there. I mean, the ancients were more worried. I mean, it was very uh not just masculine centered, but also like addressed more to elites than to regular ordinary people until Christianity comes on the scene, right?
Right.
And then there's like all sorts of interesting sermons and letters and homilies and stuff like that about anger that gets circulated around. And really anybody could become a monk or a nun, so anybody could be addressed by Cassian. Um, but yeah, I don't remember exactly where I was going with that as an
Well, it's just
answer.
I got sparked when you were actually thinking about meditation, because this is one of
Hmm.
the common things is like I want to meditate because of all of the things I've heard are good for me about that. But then I
Yeah,
immediately
yeah,
think I'm doing this wrong, and that I have the very opposite of experience of
yeah,
what
yeah.
I think I'm setting out to do. And I mean, one of the things that I teach people is just, forgiveness in the moment. And the
Okay,
fact that
yeah,
you came back and you noticed you were off, but you came back, that's the thing that you're trying to learn. But it can't, I mean, I tried meditating and then came back to it like 15, 20 years later. And the first round
yeah.
was precisely the same as how you described it. And, um, so, but I guess what I'm also interested in is like that inner voice that gets angry, me getting angry at
Oh, yeah,
myself.
yeah.
It's often like a echo of other people maybe who've been angry at me, whether it's my parents or,
Yeah, that's true.
some other person. And so there's something that well, okay, so I'm thinking of a personal situation, which I'm not going to divulge a lot of details, but it's another thing that I know, many of these thinkers talk about is when the other person is really angry.
Yeah.
And I know I've had an experience with a person who's got a lot of anger with me, and I'll just say probably some of it's justified, and I think a lot of it is over the top, right?
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, it seems so obvious, but it's been real work to like just not believe the things this person is saying about me. Because if I took as valid the names I'm being called, then I'm a pretty
Yeah.
crappy person. But I have to be able to hear that and like just let it like drip off. And that's been a real piece of work, because on the face of it, well, I didn't do that thing I'm being accused of, but it's like it still stings like really bad, to the
Yeah,
point where
yeah.
I might later discover there's like this little kernel in me that almost believed what they said, and how do I work through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're more open and reasonable people, we probably have a greater vulnerability to that, because I mean, there are some people who are like, that person is just nuts. Nothing they say has to do with me, and we
Mhm.
can do that. But when we're dealing with like people who we engage with all the time, like family members or friends or colleagues, it is easy to, like you said, take it to heart and think, well, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not looking at myself critically enough, Um, and then I guess what we would do then is like analyze, am I being reasonable in taking on their affect and what they're saying, or however else it's being structured and directed, or is this stuff that's not really reasonable? Like, there's a lot of cases where you could say, I could see how somebody would say that, but that doesn't mean that they're right, you know
Mhm.
in calling me a piece of crap who is selfish, or pick
Right.
whatever else you
Right.
want,
Right.
you know
Yeah, I read a book. I don't know, you might have seen it. I don't forget the authors, but it's something like there's three authors, and I think they call it the Harvard Negotiation Project or something. The book is just
okay.
called Difficult Conversations. But one of the
Is it
things,
is it difficult conversations or crucial conversations? Because
I think
that's like a whole platform out there that
it's
people get
called
in.
Difficult
Okay,
Conversations. There's a
difficult.
subtitle. Maybe I should look it up and put it, the information below. But one of the things they say is every difficult conversation is actually about three things. You think that you're arguing about X, Y, and Z, but
Yeah,
really
yeah,
one of the things you're arguing about is like what actually happened. Like, let's say it's a chain of events. You saw it one way, I saw it the other way. So, first of all, we don't agree on what happened.
yeah, yeah,
And then, second of all, it's whose feelings are actually more important, my feelings or your feelings? And then they say the third thing is you think you're talking about the events, but you're actually talking about what kind of person are you?
yeah,
What kind of person am I? But none of it is stated explicitly. But when they work with people, they're sort of saying this is the subcontext that's always
yeah.
actually being talked about.
So these things come to light as you explore and figure out why people are ticked off in the way that they are.
Yeah, it's like I don't know,
Yeah.
like why did you do that? That's really like what kind of a screwed up person are you anyway? Like it's
Yeah, or why did you do that to me? Is it that you don't care? Is it that you
right,
devalue me? Is it that
right,
you think I'll put up with this crap? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I just sort of throwing out all these different things, but you I think said that you have clients sometimes in philosophical counseling who essentially are working through anger, or
Yeah.
I imagine maybe you've had this situation where they don't feel like they have a lot of anger, but they have this angry person in their life. So what would that look like? Someone comes to you and you're drawing on maybe Plato and Aristotle and John Cassian and all these thinkers, but you're also there in the room, or I imagine probably sometimes you're on Zoom, but you're in
Yeah.
dialogue with this person. What's the kind of, you know, process that you might go through?
Well, I mean, before we bring up any philosophical resources, generally it's a matter of figuring out what's going on with this person. So, like in an initial session, just as if we were doing psychological counseling, which is a different, modality, you want to know their background and what's going on in their life. And as you're talking with somebody, you start to establish a rapport and figure out what their responses are likely to be, right? Are they real attentive to things? Are they just kind of like throwing things out there, all the time? And so you have to adapt yourself to their style of communication and style of reasoning. And then you can start, asking, well, what are you so pissed off about? What's going on, right? And sometimes like if it could be a work thing, like, well, this person is my boss and they're making me do stuff that I don't want to do and I'm not getting paid for. And you'd be like, well, okay, that's kind of reasonable that you're angry about that. And then you start, asking some more specific questions. Can you tell me some examples of this? And you start looking at that. Oftentimes, at least in my case, and it's probably different for other people doing this, um, it'll just sort of like suggest itself to me. Like I'll be like, oh, Plutarch talks about this in his On Controlling Anger. Here's what he has to say. And then, towards the end of the session, we'll be like, maybe you should read Plutarch, here's where you can find the text.
Uh-huh.
And some clients they're not interested in that. Like I've done a lot of executive coaching, and most of the time, people who are in the C-suite, they don't want to read extra books. They're busy. They're like, just give me the handout. give me the mantra that I have to repeat or something like
Uh-huh.
that.
Uh-huh.
There are exceptions. I actually have a client who's quit being a client years ago, who's become a good friend, who is the CEO of a housing company, and he and I will connect every so often. And we don't do philosophical counseling together. And he was actually a tutorial client, but we worked through a lot of texts. And he is a reader. If I suggest a book to him, he will read it. But that's because he's made that part of his practice, right? And so he's subbing it in with the other 10 books that he's got, ready to go in the 1 hour a day that he devotes to it. But most business people are not like, they're not into bibliotherapy, as we call it. But so then you can give them some actionable practices or insights, and come back the next time and you're like, well, did you try this out? How did it work? And then you do like a whatever you want to call it, like an after action, reconstruction of it. And maybe they got a few things wrong in certain respects, and so it wasn't as successful for them, or maybe they were doing things right and it didn't change the way they feel. And then you got to like look at why that's the case, right? But it's always individuated, and that's part of what I like about doing that kind of work, is you get to see how somebody else's mind works. And sometimes it's pretty similar to yours, and sometimes you're like, wow, this person is really different than me.
Yeah.
I got to figure out what's going on with them.
Right. Yeah, I could
Um,
see the kind of just the enjoyment you get out of that, the humor and the
yeah.
laughter that comes up. And I am imagining, because it just occurs to me even as I say this, but like humor can be an antidote, right?
Oh yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
or can be a way to diffuse a situation that could turn into anger. And I'm getting this sense that, like, maybe for you, this is just my imagination. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but like if you're around someone who operates in a totally different way and maybe get angry when you wouldn't, it's like, oh, that provides a little more perspective. It just seems like, you know this is what
Yeah.
we're trying to do, is enlarge our perspective. I think of anger as my, like if we go back to the body, I'm probably going to narrow my eyes. I'm really focused in anger,
Okay. Yeah.
and like, can I don't know. I might be projecting all kinds
It's
of things
it's
here,
funny because my wife has an angry thinking face, right? And so it took a long time where we'll work together in the same room, right? And then she'll like look over at me and she's got an angry expression on her face. I'll be like, what the hell did I do? Did I say something like 5 minutes ago? And she's stewing about that. And then I'll say, what's going on with you? And she'll, what do you mean? And I'll be, why are you giving me that look? I'm not looking at you. I'm just looking over because I'm thinking. And I'm like, well, you look like you're pissed off with me. And then she'll say, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, here's what's happening in your face. And oh, I didn't mean to do that. And some people are just that way.
Mm.
So she's, especially in the time of going on Zoom during COVID, she's had to like really watch that because,
Huh,
she'll be listening attentively and she'll look like she's angry. And then people
right,
could take the wrong impression that she's mad at something that
right.
somebody's
Well, what I
saying.
appreciate about that story is, like, she looks angry internally.
Yeah.
She doesn't feel angry, but you're feeling vibes. And then
Right. Right.
the two of you just communicate. And then there's a clarity, that comes afterwards. And even it's helpful for you because, like, oh, she's not actually mad at me. I mean, I can relax. But then later she's on Zoom and she's like, oh, well, what Greg told me, I better keep that in mind. So it seems like you both actually got something out of interaction. But of course, there's a
Yeah.
certain vulnerability and even addressing, hey, you look really angry, like in the wrong place and time, you might find out, or it might be an invitation to something you don't want.
She could be like, you know, now that you mention it,
Yeah, I wanted to come back because I have this thing that I do, and I just get several ideas, and I
yeah,
maybe say too many things at once. But I just noticed the simple statement about anger and humor. I
right,
saw
right.
you. I imagine you might have some thoughts on that.
I mean, humor, you got to be careful with it, right? Because if somebody is angry and you joke around about it,
Yeah.
that could make them angrier because they feel like you're not taking them or what it is that they're angry about seriously. I actually have a good friend who has this very funny approach. And now he's a pretty level-headed guy. He doesn't get angry in the way that I typically have in the past. And his wife though will get angry and she'll say something and then he'll add the word sexy in there and turn it into a question. So she'll be like, and I don't think that he leaves his socks on the floor, but let's just, use that as an example. She'll be like, I can't believe you left your damn socks on the floor one more time. And then he'll say, so you're saying that I left my sexy socks on the floor? And it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the first time that he does it, it doesn't typically diffuse it. And then she'll say another thing, and then he'll just do the same
Uh-huh.
approach. And by the third time that he's turning something into a sexy question, she's usually like laughing and getting over it.
Right.
And I
Well,
remember him
it's such a
explaining that to
pattern
me. Yeah,
interrupt. It's like, what?
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
disrupts the natural flow of the anger,
Hmm. Hmm.
the escalation process, you could say.
Right. Right.
So I've actually tried using that because my wife and I are both anger prone people. So obviously we've gotten in plenty of fights over the years, most of them irrational, and not very productive. And I've tried using that technique, but I'm not, it doesn't fit me. So I got to find
Right. Your
another
own.
thing to
Right.
make it
Right.
humorous, and then it would be okay.
I just appreciate your candor, talking about fights with your wife and everything. And at the same time, I mean, you're still together, and she's also the other half of ReasonIO.
Mhm.
I mean, you work together. So it would seem that whatever it was, or on various occasions, you really have discovered some level of equanimity that you didn't previously have in life.
Yeah, and we've had to work through a lot of mistaken assumptions about what like this thing that somebody did or didn't do or said or didn't say, what those things meant. And we spent a lot of time on that sort of stuff. Um Probably if we'd been more rational people, I won't say intelligent because we're both very intelligent, but sometimes being intelligent doesn't translate into being rational.
Right.
you
Right.
know if we were both more rational people, we wouldn't have wasted so much time. And actually, in the interest of candor too, I'll say this. One of the things that I regret the most about fighting with my wife is doing so in front of my kids.
Right.
um,
Right.
because it was, scary for them and disruptive, and also presents them with a bad model.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you never quite know when you're dealing with kids or other vulnerable people, um, how damaging or how traumatic something is going to be. And it's easy to say, well, that wouldn't have been so much to me, but hey, you're not that kid, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
sometimes there's things where, in the situation, I thought it was okay to say them, and I still have to like think it through and apologize for it years later, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. That actually really hits me. So I'm divorced,
Mm,
and
me too. So
yeah,
so my kids are not my wife's kids, you know.
okay, yeah. Well, and I just have one daughter, but I think she witnessed some ugly scenes, over time, and she told me later. I mean, obviously, it's traumatic for a kid that the divorce happens, but she eventually told me, I'm glad I don't have to see that stuff anymore.
Mm,
I mean, her
yeah.
life is complicated because mom and dad aren't together, but she was very clear on that, and that was like I had to really
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
that in, and take an extra breath, and you know, just like let that
Those
sink
sort of
in.
things are humbling, aren't
Yeah,
they?
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
looking.
interesting. I'll say this too. It's
Yeah.
interesting when you're like somebody who actually gives other people advice and can help them indeed to
Mhm.
find out that you're still messed up, right? There's something about that where and there's a temptation to be like, "Oh, I better like hide this away because I don't want, other people to be like, you hypocrite."
Right.
But it doesn't do any good to hide it away. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to like air your dirty laundry everywhere.
Right.
But to you mentioned vulnerability. That sort of vulnerability can be quite helpful for other people.
Yeah, I'm remembering just one more piece from my notes, and I also see the time we're going to have to. I know you have somewhere to be in a moment, but I guess this was Epictetus. Um, Apparently, this is just my notes from listening to
Yeah.
you, so you'll say more. But he talked about really trying to understand the anger of others, and
Yeah.
he's not always expecting other people to be rational, and then you might be less likely to be provoked by them. And so that's a little different, but what you just said about like admitting our own faults, it seems like almost like we're offering something like you know being understood
Yeah.
goes both ways. And
Yeah, I mean, Epictetus and the Stoics' general approach to other people doing things that would make us angry, we feel, insulted or humiliated or injured, is to say, okay, there is a genuine harm that took place. Maybe they are actually insulting you. They went out of their way to like get in your face and call you some name, but they're doing that because they're mistaken about what's reasonable, what's good, what's true, right? They think that this is how a person ought to behave, and you have a choice. You can like get angry at them and say, "Oh, that person is, doing the wrong thing. I should punish them." Or you can say to yourself, "Oh, you poor bastard. You've got these crazy ideas about what it is to like be a human being with other human beings." And then you can feel, now it's translated as usually as pity. In Greek, it's eleos, but we can also translate it as compassion, right?
mm, yeah,
And Epictetus thinks that's, it's not ideal, but it's ideal would be like not be bothered at all. But I think it's great to feel compassion towards other people. And I think it's fine to say, in your head, don't say to them out loud, "Oh, you poor bastard." You think that's the right way
uh-huh.
to act. And then
Yeah.
you don't have to get angry at them.
Hmm.
And so that can be, I think, for people like me, that can be very helpful
Yeah.
because you're substituting one line of thinking that results in an emotion for a different one. And you don't have to like pretend like they're not being a bad person. They might actually be a bad person, but you don't have to allow that to turn you into, you know, um, a revenge seeker or grudge holder or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I could talk with you for another hour. This has been really fascinating, and enjoyable. Just
Yeah.
appreciate your your very honest and real way of communicating this stuff.
Well,
But
thanks. I've
yeah,
I've enjoyed it too. We can always do this again sometime.
yeah, it would be fun. But just given that I know you have somewhere to be, I'm just kind of wondering where you're at the end of our conversation, what's come up for you, and also just cognizant of people might be listening in. Are there any sort of just final thoughts that you want to share? And you can also include how people could get in touch with you, and we'll be happy to
Okay.
get information
Yeah, I mean the
as well.
easiest it's great because there's a lot of Gregory Sadlers out there, but I'm the one who shows up the most on Google. So all you gotta do is put Gregory Sadler in, and like all the stuff will pop up, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
sucks for all the other Gregory Sadlers, unfortunately. But their problem, not mine. Um, but final thoughts. I guess I would say, going back to something that you were saying earlier about being forgiving to ourselves. So, if we are dealing with anger, whether we've got like um, bad disposition that came out of, childhood and bad habits and maybe trauma or something like that, or whether we just have occasional lapses, I think it's important to recognize that changing ourselves for the better, it takes a lot of work, and it's not like a continual steady progress. We fall down all the time, right? So without making excuses for ourselves, I think it's okay for us to say, "Ah, yeah, I screwed up again." And now, obviously, if we didn't just screw up, but like said something horrible to somebody, we should apologize for that, right? But it's okay for us to not be perfect. And
Yeah.
when it comes to anger, I mean, changing it takes years and years and years, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I like that. That's good final thoughts. So we'll end it right there.
sounds good.
Yeah. So once again, just thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Take care.